Hey guys, welcome back to the Med Boys podcast. My name is Naman, and today we have a special guest. We have Sadhana, who is a medical student in the UK, and she's also a fellow YouTuber. So, welcome to the podcast, Sadhana. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Naman. Thank you so much for having me. As Naman said, I am a second year medical student at Imperial College, London. It's really kind of them to invite me onto the podcast, so thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, Sadhana. Let's just get into the questions really quickly. Could you explain the UK med school process very briefly so our viewers kind of get an understanding about it?
So is this the interview process?
Just
So
the
not the
whole
interview, the
process.
application
Yeah.
process.
hmm
Okay, so it's quite like you apply very early on. So I know for you guys it's a postgrad course, medicine. But in England you could do a postgrad course, but most people go through the undergrad process. So you basically kind of cross loads of barriers to get past like each barrier, and you kind of finally get into medical school. So there are four kind of main hurdles that you have to kind of cross. The first one is your admissions test. So that's the BMAT or the UKCAT, which is now, I think they call it the UCAT now, because they use it in Australia as well. And then you have your personal statement, which is like an essay, kind of like explaining why you want to do medicine. You kind of do this like essay for every course, but your essay should be like in specific pertaining to medicine. And then you have an interview. If the university is impressed by like your essay and your BMAT or UCAT scores, then you get an interview. And then if they're impressed by your interview, they will give you like a conditional offer. So this offer is kind of like a contract between yourself and the university, and it kind of like states that if you get these many grades in your A-level exams, then you can get a place at the university, and those grades will be released in the August, and you should hopefully start university in October or September, kind of around then. But this is all kind of in your, I don't know if you guys, do you call it junior and senior year in high school in Canada? I don't know if that's an American thing or if that's Canadian.
I guess like grade 11 and grade 12
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. So yeah, for us it's year 12 and year 13. So
Oh,
you kind of apply around there, and then hopefully you should get into medical school.
Well, I guess there are some differences between the UK medical school process and the Canadian medical school process. And one difference that I'd like to touch on is you mentioned something about the UCAT and as well as the BMAT.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you've heard of the MCAT, but that's what we have here in Canada. It's the Medical College Admission Test. And that's the test, the standardized test you need to actually write to get into medical school. You need to do well on that. So are you aware of that test and whether there are any differences between, for example, the UCAT and the MCAT?
Yeah. So I mean, I've heard that the MCAT is something really crazy, like what, 6 hours, 7 hours? Um,
Yeah, it's around 7 hours of
oh my
testing.
God, yeah. No, you can be at like both 2 hour papers. They're not as long as the MCAT. The UCAT is kind of less clinically orientated, so it's more like an aptitude test. So it's now they call it the University Clinical Aptitude Test, and they have, I think, 5 sections. First one is like verbal reasoning, and then you have maths, like quantitative reasoning, decision making, and then abstract reasoning, where you have to like, it's a really weird one. You have to like put boxes in, match them up with the shapes that they look like. It's a really weird section. And then they have a situational judgment section, which I would say is the most kind of clinically relevant section. You basically have like ethical scenarios, and you match them up to see how appropriate your response would be to that scenario. And then the BMAT is more kind of scientific. So only a few universities use BMAT, Imperial being one of them. And it's kind of in 3 sections, again, 2 hours for all 3 sections together. The first section is an hour long. It's about kind of, it's quite similar to the UCAT. It's kind of quantitative reasoning, decision making, verbal reasoning, and all of that. And then the second section is a scientific section, kind of testing you on your basic science knowledge. So you have kind of basic physics, basic maths, basic chemistry, and basic biology. And then the third section is kind of like an essay section. So they'll give you like a quote or an ethical phrase, and they'll ask you to argue that kind of quote or phrase. And in my one back in the day when I did it, not that long ago, but it was before COVID, it was on a piece of paper, but now I think it's online. But when I did it, they gave you like this really tiny piece of paper, and it was like 20 lines, in like really small lines, and you had to write like the essay in that line, and you weren't given like another piece of paper. So I guess that was the most kind of difficult section, because you had to really think about what you wanted to argue on that section, because you had to do it in pen as well. You couldn't rub anything out or kind of reiterate what you wanted to say. So that's kind of the BMAT and the UCAT.
Yeah, I think writing an essay during something like the MCAT or the BMAT is terrifying. I don't think we'd even like think about doing something like that. But what would you say is one lesson that you learned after taking the BMAT, whether that be a life lesson or just some kind of change in your studying?
That's a really good question. I think the main lesson I learned is that it's never too late to start. Because trust me, I left my BMAT revision till like the very end, and I was panicking. Like I had like 2 weeks to go, and my BMAT was like in 2 weeks, and I just come back from holiday, and I was thinking like, oh, I don't have enough time. But if you actually put your mind to it and you start kind of whenever you have the time, and you kind of just kind of go full steam ahead, and kind of plan your time effectively, you'll be able to do it. So I think it's never too late to start, and you shouldn't panic if you think it's the end of the world.
And that's a very inspiring lesson that you're giving us there, Sadhana. I had a question for you. So in the UK, because you guys are going straight from high school to medical school, you have to make that decision pretty early, and you have to make sure that you know that you really want to be a doctor, especially with everything that's been going on in the world these days. So how'd you come to that decision? Because here we have 4 extra years to make that. Could you walk us through your process?
Yeah, so yeah, as you said, I came across that like decision quite early on. I was around 15 or 16 at the time when I decided that I wanted to do medicine. Most people come across that decision when they pick their A-level subjects, again at the age of 15 or 16. I'll be honest, like growing up, I did not want to be a doctor. I thought it was like the worst job in the world. I was like, why like you're looking at ill people every single day. It's just like, why do you want to do that? But then I used to really love like mysteries. I loved like Sherlock Holmes, and I really loved like solving puzzles and stuff. And it was actually when my granddad was ill in hospital, and I realized what a doctor actually did. Because I think what you see in the media and what you see on TV shows, and even when you're like a child going to the pediatrician and kind of looking at doctors, it's not really representative of what you see in real life. And kind of seeing that kind of hospital medicine really made me think about how it was kind of a profession where you're solving puzzles. It's a very like hands-on profession. So when I was about 15 or 16, I decided that yeah, I want to do medicine, and I haven't looked back since.
Well, that's definitely amazing. I mean, I think here in Canada, I feel like there's always a different progress in terms of when you want to decide to be a doctor, and it's I guess there's some similarity in when most people decide to be a doctor here in Canada. It's around the same age, 15 or 16. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Well, moving on, I want to hear more about your life in medical school. So how has your overall, your first 2 years been? And if you could touch on some of the things that you do on a daily basis, that would be great as well.
So I won't lie, I've not been the best representative of a medical student in the UK, because these people here at my medical school are so hardworking. We do like to enjoy ourselves. First year was like a lot about kind of getting to know people, and kind of getting used to the environment. Second year, I feel like everyone's more kind of work orientated and kind of focused on getting the content done. In terms of like academics, first year is very kind of broad, like you kind of learn about all the systems, and it was a huge step from, I'd say, from school to going to university, especially because I took a gap year. So it was quite challenging initially for me to get adjusted to that environment. But the second year, I am enjoying the content a bit more because I'm kind of building on what I learned last year. And second year, we kind of learn about what could go wrong. So first year, it's just kind of like the baseline of what's happening. And then second year is more like the diseases and what could go wrong. And then, yeah, that's kind of how I've been experiencing medical school so far. It's enjoyable, but it's challenging, I'd say.
Yeah, it must be very, very challenging. And what's Imperial College like? And is it the only college or university that you applied to when you were applying?
So when I applied to normally you have 5 university options to apply to through UCAS, which is the university and college admission system that they use in the UK. But you're supposed to normally apply to 4 medical schools and 1 non-medical school when you apply in the UK. I didn't think I'd get into medical school, so I applied to 3 medical schools and 2 backups just in case. Imperial was my top choice, and then I applied to the University of Leeds and the University of Cardiff. I didn't get into either of those, but I didn't really care because I didn't really want to go to those universities. But Imperial was nice enough to give me an interview and then eventually an offer. Imperial's a very diverse university. I think I was really worried. I mean, I've grown up in London my whole life, so I was quite comfortable with the environment in London, but I was worried oh, it's probably going to be all home students, people that haven't people I probably know already. But you get people from all across the country, all across the world. It's a very diverse university, and you do learn a lot about different cultures. Also the hospitals that are affiliated with Imperial, so different medical schools have different hospitals affiliated with them, and you go do clinical placements at those hospitals, and the variety of patients you see at the hospitals in Imperial is really different to what you would maybe see somewhere in Leeds, which is quite geographically, it's quite up north, so you'd see a different demographic of people. So London is quite a hub of diversity and kind of you see different people and you experience different cultures and things.
That's really nice to hear. And yeah, I think it helps a lot when you have a diverse patient population, because that's what you're going to see your whole life, right? So I think it's really smart that you went and looked at it like that. In general, how competitive is the admissions process there in the UK? Because I know here in Canada, it's almost impossible these days. In the US, it's pretty bad. So how's it going in the UK for admissions?
I'd say it's fairly competitive. It's very I don't think it's as I won't lie, I don't think it's as competitive. I've heard a lot of stories about applying in Canada and in the US, and it sounds brutal, but I don't think it's as competitive as Canada and the US, but I think it's definitely quite competitive here. I think Imperial, the ratio for getting in was 1 in 6, or not 1 in 6, 1 in 10 or something, I can't remember, but I think over the years it does get more competitive. Unfortunately, there is a shortage of doctors in the UK, so we don't have enough spaces for the number of doctors that we need. But I think hopefully in the future there are more medical schools coming into place. So they're kind of making it easier for people to get into medicine. They're trying to also include people from underprivileged backgrounds to get in. So normally in the past, it used to be people from a certain type of school, from a certain type of background with a certain grade. But now they're kind of looking at the application more holistically, not just kind of academically, but also their kind of personal qualities and kind of their bedside manner as a doctor and different things like that.
So given the fact that you mentioned that the medical school process in the UK is trying to become more holistic, for prospective students in the UK or even international students looking to get into a UK medical school, what's some pieces of advice that you'd offer them in terms of tailoring their application so that they're the perfect candidate for a UK med school? Sorry about that.
I'd say definitely don't just focus on your academics. I mean, academics are important, but I think it's also important to focus on character building. So whether it's volunteering or kind of visiting or teaching, visiting care homes, or kind of setting up a business, or kind of showing that you have traits that are quite desirable in a doctor. So I know for my personal application, I volunteered at a care home, so that kind of helped me build like empathy and kind of build kind of a more caring character, because I think it's quite easy to get hung up on just being a robot and kind of getting everything done academically, but some people might not necessarily have the empathy side of medicine, or the kind of more, I don't know how to explain it, but like kind of the more human characteristics that you need to be a doctor.
Research here in Canada and the States is very important for medical school. A lot argue that it's required for you to get into medical school, and medical schools like it a lot. How important is research for medical schools in the UK?
So I'd say before you get into medical school, as it is an undergraduate course, you don't really have much opportunity to do research. But they do really like to see that you've taken the initiative to explore something beyond your school curriculum. So we do have like a course. I wouldn't say it's a course, it's like a paper that you write called the EPQ, which is called the Extended Project Qualification. So that counts for half an A level. I did my EPQ on like Alzheimer's, so you could do it on any kind of it's like a short essay. Well, not really short, it's like a 2,000 page essay, 2,000 word essay on any kind of topic that you're interested in. And it kind of shows that you've taken the initiative to explore something outside of like your normal A-level studies. But I would say research is really, really important for when you actually qualify and become a doctor, because you get points for the research you've conducted when you're in medical school. So if, for example, you want to go into a surgical specialty, they will look at the research you've done before medical school, and more importantly in medical school. So most of most medical students kind of conduct research in their first, second and third years of medical school, and they kind of build their portfolio over that time.
That's pretty similar to how it is here. They try to add more research in undergrad years, but it's not, most people don't have that much research anyways. So it's very similar to what you're saying. You briefly mentioned that you took a gap year before going to medical school. How was that experience? And do you think it prepared you better for medical school? I know you said that it was a little harder to get adjusted, but in terms of character building and learning more about yourself, how did that impact you?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, my gap year was quite an unexpected one because of COVID, and it was quite like, I felt quite like isolated because you couldn't really leave the house or do anything. But I do agree that it kind of helped me with character building. It helped me kind of find pleasure in my own company, because before I was so reliant on like my friends and people around me to kind of motivate me and help me. But it kind of helped me get kind of self-motivated. I'd say like I was someone who always used to work with a deadline. So if I had like homework at school or a test coming up, I'd always like wait till the last minute and then cram and get it done before the deadline. But it also kind of taught me to set myself my own deadlines. So I had to kind of, the only person I had to be accountable for was myself. So I had to kind of build that self-discipline, which I guess is really important for medical school, because it's a very independent course and you have to kind of keep yourself in check. So I guess that did help a bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like gap years can definitely be beneficial for a lot of people. And would you recommend that people take gap years?
I mean, if you have a plan for your gap year and you really want to take a gap year, I really do recommend you do. But if, like, for example, you're just kind of taking it because like you want to year out, kind of think about what you're going to do with your gap year, because I will say it can be incredibly boring if you don't have a plan and it's kind of impromptu. But I'd really recommend it if you do have a plan and you really do want to take one.
Okay, well, for those of you who are thinking of taking a gap year, or there's Sadhana's advice, so please do what you want with it. Okay, so moving just a little bit back into time, let's talk more about the process by which you actually applied and got into medical school. So first and foremost, we're going to ask you a series of questions about the admissions process, but we're going to start with just the timeline. Could you talk more about, the timeline for the process, when you wrote your UCAT as well as your BMAT, when you took your interviews, when you actually completed your personal statement, all of that stuff?
Yeah, so It kind of all starts around the summer of year 12 going into year 13. So I guess in Canada it would be the summer of 11th grade going into 12th grade. So that summer is a very crucial summer, because in that summer you have to start working on your applications. You start writing your personal statement, and you take your UCAT and your BMAT. You don't have to take both, because some universities look at the UCAT and some universities look at the BMAT. So before you decide if you want to take the UCAT or the BMAT, you have to decide which universities you want to apply to. So I took the BMAT in August. You have 2 sittings for the BMAT. You have one in August and you have one in October. And you can choose which BMAT you take depending on when you want to get your results. So if you do it in August, then you get your results earlier on, before the deadline to apply to university. So that deadline is on the 15th of October. So you get your results before the 15th of October. But if you take your BMAT after you apply to university, after the 15th of October, you won't get your results till after you've applied. So you won't know how well you did and can't strategically apply based on your grades. The UCAT has like several sittings, but you can only take the UCAT once in a year. And it runs from, I think, July to September. So you can take it from any day, I think, any weekday in July or September. You can take the UCAT. You could probably even do it in a weekend. I don't really know, but I did mine on a weekday. And you go to your local DVLA, which is like where you do your driving test. This is how informal the UCAT is. You literally go to where you do your driving test and you sit and you do your UCAT. I remember my UCAT, I was doing my UCAT and this guy next to me was like swearing because he was getting all the questions in his driving test wrong. And I was just like, this is so confusing, this is so distracting. But that's how we did our UCAT back before COVID. I think now there might be more restrictions on how you can do it or where you can do your UCAT. I know some schools have now been like given the status of being a testing center, so you could probably do your UCAT at school. So that kind of happens in the summer, and then in that summer you also write your personal statement, and you also, if you haven't got work experience already, so sorry, this is something I forgot to mention earlier, but you're supposed to have work experience, or you're supposed to have kind of experience in the medical field. So you're supposed to know what the medical profession entails, and you're supposed to kind of have evidence for that. And for that, most students, they go to hospitals or they go to a healthcare setting or a care home or something that involves patients, and they'll kind of talk about that in their personal statement. So once you've finished your work experience, and you can write about it in your personal statement, and then everything should be submitted by the 15th of October. And then I think around December, like October, November, December, offers start rolling in. So this is, or not offers, sorry, interviews start rolling in. So this is when you get an invitation to go to the university to have an interview. And depending on where you apply, you have two types of interviews. So you could have a multiple mini interview, which you have 7 stations, and each station tests you on a different skill. Or you could have a panel interview, which is a very formal traditional interview where you just kind of sit across the table from your interviewer for like half an hour, and they talk to you about why you want to do medicine. They ask you different questions. These are kind of more traditional. That's more kind of traditional interview style. They don't really do that much anymore. I think the only places that still do that is Oxford and Cambridge. But I think Imperial have now adopted the multiple mini interview process. So when I went, I had 7 stations. Each station was testing me on a different skill. So one was like leadership, one was motivation for medicine, different stations. And my interview was in February. And then around March is when offers start rolling in. So this is your conditional offer. So this is the contract I said. So if you get an A star and 2 A's, then you can get a seat at our university. That's kind of the offer. And then you take your A-level exams in June or July, May or June, July, I can't remember. And you get your grades. So results day is in August. So when you get your grades, you'll see if you've met your conditions for your offer. And then hopefully if you've met it, you have a seat at the university and you can go. And then term will start in August. So I'm sorry, in September. So you get your results in August, you start university in September. So it's like a 1-month turnaround between knowing that you're going somewhere and actually going there.
Well, that is a lot of dates, a lot of information. But before going back to the UCAT for a second. Given that it's an aptitude test, is there actually a way to prepare for it?
So I don't really know. I tried preparing. I'll be honest, I didn't do that well on my UCAT because, as you said, there's no kind of, because it's an aptitude test, there's no kind of way to prepare. I would say the one thing you could do to prepare is practice. I think the number one problem with me with my UCAT was I didn't practice enough, because I booked it quite early in July. So I was still at school, so I didn't have time to practice or revise or kind of do anything in preparation for the UCAT. But yeah, I would say the number one thing is practice. There's also an aspect of natural smartness that I think you need for aptitude tests. So I guess there is no kind of way to prepare, but yeah, I would say practice makes perfect for the UCAT.
From the way you've described it, it sounds a lot like an IQ test that they'd take to like put you in a gifted section. I don't know if you guys have that there.
We don't really have a gifted section, but yeah, it is really like an IQ test, I would say.
Yeah. So that's pretty intimidating because there's a lot of limitations that can stop you from these things, especially the blocks you were talking about and putting into the pattern. That can be very frightening, just at the last moment. But you said the BMAT was more clinically or more scientific based. So did you have a process for that was different from the UCAT?
Definitely. I think I spent more of my time looking at the science because it had been a while since I'd done physics. So I decided to like look back on the content that they were assessing for physics in the BMAT. So I definitely spent a lot more time revising, like properly like studying for the BMAT, like based on like the scientific knowledge that I needed. And I also spent time practicing essay writing and like physically writing the essay, because that was one thing in the BMAT that wasn't in the UCAT, the fact that it was on paper and it was on like a physical piece of paper in an exam hall, whereas the UCAT was on a computer in like your driving test center. So it was quite like a different atmosphere. I think even like the mock scenarios when I was trying to test myself at home, I kind of have a quiet room and test myself for the BMAT in my room, kind of on a piece of paper. But if it was the UCAT, I just sit in a noisy room somewhere and use my computer. So I think the ways that you go about revising each of them are different.
Okay, and then moving on to the personal statement process, like how was the writing process for that? And do you have any tips on how to create the perfect personal statement?
Yes. So I think the writing process, as I said, you kind of do it over the summer. So you shouldn't really leave it to the last minute, because I say that I did leave mine to the last minute, but it's advised that you shouldn't like leave yours to the last minute. Start as early as possible. I think for the personal statement, be kind of honest about yourself. Don't kind of butter yourself up, because they will ask you about it in your interview. You have to, so if you do get an interview for medical school, you'll have to submit a copy of your personal statement to the medical school. So they obviously will see all the things that you've put on it. So if you say that you've read a book, make sure you've read the book, because I have a friend who claimed that she read a book on her personal statement. They asked her about it in her interview and she had not read the book. So she had to make something up about the book. There was also another scenario where there's like age-old story. I don't know if it's true, but apparently someone wrote about an article they'd read, and the writer of the article was the interviewer. So they asked him, "Oh, how did you find the article?" But then he hadn't read the article. So make sure you're very honest in your personal statement. Don't be scared to be cocky or kind of show yourself up too much, because it is kind of your opportunity to kind of big yourself up. Don't sound overconfident, but sound like confident in your personal statement. I think also, if you've done something and you think it's worth mentioning, mention it, because there are so many times where people are like, "Oh, that's so stupid, why should I mention it?" But there's always a reason to mention different things. So for example, I was in choir at school and I was like, why should I mention that? Like, it's choir, like everyone does choir. But you could, if you kind of draw out a learning point from that thing. So for example, I was like, oh, teamwork, choir teamwork, I was in a team. So it helped me kind of build my teamwork skills. You could talk about it. Literally, there's nothing that's too small to talk about. So yeah, I'd say also, don't think that you're not good enough in your personal statement, because I feel like when people approach it, they're like, oh, I don't have enough to write. Like loads of people have like so many different things they do, but if you've done like one small thing, look at something that you've learned from that experience and write about it.
Yeah, those are very good tips. We've heard that writing is much more important than actually the experience. You could do something as simple as working as a cashier, but if you explain it well, that goes a long way. And now moving on to the interview, the MMIs, or the multiple mini interviews, actually exist in Canada as well. How did you prepare for them?
So I basically got my family to interrogate me. That's how I prepared. So I had this book for the MMIs where it was like 100 questions that you get in an MMI. And I got each member of my family to like get a question and like approach me at different times and just kind of like jump scare me with the questions. And then you just basically have to come up with an answer at the top of your head. And it kind of helped me build that high pressure environment that you would get at an actual MMI. I would also read around medicine a lot. I would keep up with the news and make sure I'm up to date with everything, just in case they do ask me about medical news in the NHS or kind of in Britain or in the EU, because Brexit was happening back then. So they had so many questions about like how that would affect the UK medical schools. And I think read around medicine and also keep up to date with news. Also, don't memorize answers. I know like there are so many questions that could have answers that you could just memorize, but I think as it sounds better if it's more organic and kind of more at the top of your head rather than kind of a scripted answer in the MMI. So that's kind of how I prepared.
And that's very similar to how people prepare here. And those are very good tips, Sadhana. I'm sure people will really benefit from that. We know you have a YouTube channel, and it's a really good YouTube channel. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started and why did you start? What were your motivations?
So there was no kind of logic to me starting my YouTube channel. It was just kind of in my gap year, I was so bored, and I thought I'd make a channel because I was bored in my gap year, and I thought I'd also use that as an opportunity to share my A-level journey and share my story about how I got into medicine, because I don't think it was the easiest process. And I don't think anyone should have to really go through that process alone. So I thought, I remember like in that whole process, seeing people on YouTube kind of talking about it. And I was like, why don't I talk about it as well? I don't know if you guys know the YouTuber Karma Medic. He's Canadian as well. And he was talking about the UCAT, and he had like a series of, he's a doctor now, but he had like a series of, back then he had a series of how he revised for the UCAT and how he found it, and now his like experience in medical school. And I thought it was quite interesting to see someone else's perspective of all of this. So I thought, why not share my perspective? And I have extra time in my gap year, so why not do this? And yeah, I'm really happy that people have been finding it useful, and I hope to continue to do that and kind of help people in this process.
It's funny that you speak on Karma Medic too, because we know him and he's one of our biggest sources of inspiration for even starting our YouTube channel. A lot of his videos are super helpful. So Karma Medic, if you ever watch this,
yeah, shout out to you.
Shout out to Karma Medic. But yeah, moving on, could you talk more about the licensing process in the UK? So I guess whenever you graduate medical school and you're going to that final process of becoming that doctor, wearing that white coat and actually starting to treat patients more. So yeah, could you talk more about the process, as well as whether or not you plan on staying in the UK or even moving out to some other country like the States or something like that?
That's a very controversial question that you're asking right now, especially with the state of the NHS, I must say. But yeah, so the licensing process is like you have your MLA, which is your medical licensing assessment. I think I might be butchering that abbreviation, but I think it's called the MLA. And when you graduate after 6th year, you do your foundation training. So you're an F1 and an F2, which is foundation year 1, foundation year 2. So this is when you have a provisional license with the GMC, which is the General Medical Council. And then after you finish your foundation training, then you do specialist training or kind of core training at whatever specialty you want to do. Then you have a full license with the GMC. So after you finish medical school, you have a provisional license, and then after those 2 years of foundation training, you'll have a full license. So I think the MLA is that assessment that you take. I think you also take a situational judgment test, which kind of and based on that, you kind of get allocated a hospital, which will then train you for your like final your final license. And then in terms of the moving abroad, I know loads of people in my university have started thinking about step one for the what's it called? I forgot what it's called, but the USMLE?
USMLE.
Yeah, that one. And yeah, I haven't really thought about it yet, I won't lie. I haven't thought about going abroad. I really like the NHS, but the current situation is that it's very shambolic. So it's a bit infuriating to stay in the NHS for most doctors. Everyone's going on strike. So loads of doctors from the UK are leaving. They are going to other countries. But I think something that really attracted me to medicine in the UK is that you always have job security with the NHS, and you always have patients to treat because everything's free. So no one's going to stop coming to you. But yeah, I think because of the way things are currently, it's a bit up in the air. I don't know.
Yeah, so like building up on that question, I just want to step back and ask you about what London life is actually like. We've always wanted to just go for a trip there, but London's always compared to Toronto as well, which is where we're from, because of the diversity here and a lot of different cultures. What do you like? What has your experience been like? I know you mentioned that you were born in London, and do you think it'd be good to be a doctor there?
So I was born in India, but I've grown up here. I moved here when I was about 3 years old. So I've basically grown up in London and I've lived here all my life. But I think it would be really interesting to be a doctor here, as you said, like in Toronto as well. I haven't visited Toronto, I'd love to visit. But it's very diverse. It's very like the patient population that you get, as we mentioned before, it's very diverse and you get a variety of different people to treat. In terms of living in London and kind of like growing up in London, it's been very fun. It's been like there's never like a time where I'm bored, I don't know what to do, because it's the capital. So there's like so many things to do, so many places to visit. Even like the campus unis in London, they're not really campus unis because they're like in the middle of central London. So I stayed at university last year. This year I'm at home, but last year it was really fun being in South Kensington. Kind of I was right next door to the Royal Albert Hall and kind of all the museums, so it was really fun to kind of get that aspect. And even though I've lived here, I still feel like a tourist. Every time I go to like central London, I'll take a picture of everything. And yeah, it's a really nice place. You guys should definitely come visit.
We definitely will. We'll be going there pretty soon. What are your future plans with the YouTube and with medicine? I know this sounds like an interview question, but we're really interested to hear about it.
Well, in terms of YouTube, as I said, I hope to my channel's a bit dormant at the moment, but I hope to kind of after exams and stuff, I hope to continue to make videos and help people with this application process, or kind of give them an insight into medical school. In terms of medicine, I mean, first of all, I hope to pass second year because it's been looking a bit rough recently, but I really hope to pass second year. And I think in the future, I mean, I don't really know what I want to go into in particular, but I really like the idea of research and surgery. So I want to kind of look into something kind of centered around that, maybe kind of explore that more in medical school, but I'm not really sure yet.
Well, it definitely sounds like you're in for a rough ride, but there's always going to be that light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm sure you're going to pass second year and go on to do what you want at the end of the day. So that brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much, Sadhana, for coming on and sharing your wonderful personal experiences, as well as your insight into the medical school application process in the UK. I'm sure our audience would find any of those tips really helpful. And for those of you looking to check out Sadhana, we'll link her YouTube channel in the description below. And for, in terms of ending remarks, do you have anything you would want to add, Sadhana?
No, thank you for having me on, and make sure you like, subscribe, and comment on this video, and subscribe to Med Boys.
See you all next time. Bye-bye.